30 minutes.
Thank you, Dabak. My name is Marty. I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank Dr. Shashir for asking me to come and speak with you guys this morning, and for the rest of you welcoming me. And Sajid, I got so much out of your talk. It was insane. I needed that. I needed that big times. My sobriety date is November 10th of 1977. I have a home group. It's the Stay Connected group. My home group used to be the Pacific group in West Los Angeles, California. I moved out to the Palm Springs area and I connected with a group out here called Stay Connected. I want to thank a couple people for coming out and support me. I got Henry here. You guys can see him. He's the ugly white guy on the screen. He's from Texas. And then I got a guy that I sponsor here, Charlie H. And he's from Florida. So I thank these two guys for coming out and supporting me. And you know, when the committee was asking me for my sobriety date, my home group, and a topic, I'm not good at picking a topic ahead of time. You know, I'm so spontaneous, it's ridiculous. And I like to do everything at the last minute. Because see, this is one of my old ideas. If I do something at the last minute, it's not my fault that it doesn't work out. You know, so I came to Alcoholics Anonymous at the ripe young age of 15 years old. And that's not a big deal anymore nowadays. A lot of people are coming to Alcoholics Anonymous as teenagers. But in 1977, there weren't too many of us. And I'm just one of those lucky guys that has stayed sober since I came in. And I drank and used for 9 years. For 6 years. I started at 9 years old and I quit at 15. And after 6 years of drinking and using, I built up a big enough story for me to stay in Alcoholics Anonymous for 44 years. By the time I got to you guys, just to identify a little bit, I had 2 DUIs. That's driving under the influence stories. I had 3 breaking and entering charges. And I've been kicked out or dropped out of 5 different schools. So I had issues coming. Now, I don't think you should have 1 DUI story if you don't even have a driver's license, but I got 2 of those things. So I had issues coming into Alcoholics Anonymous at the young age of 15. And had I known I was going to be doing what I was going to be doing for the following 44 years, I don't know if I would have stuck around. You know, because I came into Alcoholics Anonymous with a lot of old ideas. You know, I identified with a lot of Sachin's story. You know, I mean, he's really graphic and clear about what alcohol does to us. You know, when he talked about, you know, underneath his kid's bed and hadn't fed his kid for 6 to 8 hours, boy, I get that. I totally get that. When drugs and alcohol are in the picture, everything else is not. You know, I don't take care of myself. I don't take care of others. I don't take care of family, pets, plants. I don't take care of anything when drugs or alcohol in the picture. And then Sachin talked a lot about connection and recovery. And to me, today, December 10th, 2021, that's huge. You know, because left to my own devices, I don't like to be in the here and now. The here and now is boring. The here and now sucks. The here and now is not fun. The here and now is like a lot of things, and it's just not where I want to be. I'd much rather fantasize about the future or get depressed about the past. You know, so I really appreciate that. You know, I wrote down something, and I don't write stuff down. I know a bunch of people in Alcoholics Anonymous, when I hear them share at meetings, they said that they write stuff down. But Sachin said something that I had to write down. Because when he started talking about his connection with God, I wrote down, every time something bad happens, I blame God or my bad behavior. You know, whatever this bad event that is happening, whatever it may be, it's happening to me because of all the bad behavior I've had in the past, all the bad choices I've made. God's retaliating on me, you know, or I just downright blame myself, which taps into a lot of my old ideas. And when something good happens to me, I call it hard work or just good luck. I don't give credit to God. See, so that's what I wrote down out of Sachin's talk. So thank you very much. Not everybody in Texas is bad. That was a joke for you Texans. But anyways, a few of my old ideas that I got rid of. I had the pleasure once upon a time of doing the steps with this guy named Clint Hodges, who is sponsored by this guy named Chuck Chamberlain. Chuck Chamberlain wrote that book, A New Pair of Glasses. Chuck Chamberlain was also my father's AA sponsor. So I knew this man well. And Chuck C just really studied the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. He's a self-proclaimed philosopher of alcoholism and Alcoholics Anonymous. And Chuck C was thoroughly convinced after he dissected the you-know-what out of that big book. He was thoroughly convinced that if you can come to his house with a written inventory, you can do all 12 steps in one day. And Chuck C referred to that as uncover, discover, and discard. Uncover what you've been looking for your whole life. Discover that, and then you discard all the misinformation that's been laid on you since the beginning of time. And the misinformation are my old ideas. You know, we hear it read in chapter 5 every meeting that we go to. That, oh, I want that number. That if, I got to write down Sanjeev's number, man. Sorry, folks. It's important to me. That we have to let go of our old ideas. The result is nil until we let go absolutely, it says. Let go of what? We let go of these old ideas that keeping Marty down from being the best Marty I can be. And some of my old ideas that I was able to get rid of when I did the steps in one day with Clint. One of them is that I'm stupid. You know, and I have story after story after story to prove to you that I'm stupid. Now, not one person in my whole life, teacher, parent, sibling, friend, nobody ever sat down and looked me right in my face and said, Marty, you are stupid. See, my old sponsor, my old sponsor, Clancy used to say we have a disease of perception. So my perception started as a young kid, the first time I was made fun of in school. And I equated that being made fun of to being stupid. And then I get a D or an F on a test. And I say, see, I'm stupid. And then it happened over and over and over again that every time I did something wrong or not right, I dropped that under another tally mark underneath that old idea that I am stupid. So by the time I did the steps with Clint, I had so many stories to prove to Clint that I was stupid. Okay, here's the proof. You know, and I used to drink with this hillbilly from Texas. Now, think about this real quick. I quit drinking when I was 15. So the likelihood of me having sex before then, by choice, was pretty slim. Or unfortunately, for my story is I was, and it was my choice. I have that 12-step program in my life too, you know. But you think about it, I was 13, 14 years old, sitting around drinking with this hillbilly friend, and we would talk about women. You know, and he said this one line, and it stuck in my little bitty brain. He said, more the cushion, the better the pushing. So what that meant was the best women to be with were chunky. And then, so what did I do with that old idea? I proved that to be right again and again and again. Because I would get me a chunky woman, and man, she was just great. She's absolutely great. And then I'd go after a gorgeous woman, and she'd treat me like crap. She had a lot of control issues, and she was bad in bed. And I have story after story after story to prove that to you. So when I did the steps with Clint again, he asked me, he says, so if you're walking into an AA dance and you see an A girl and a B girl, the A girl is the gorgeous girl, and the B girl is her friend. What are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go ask the B girl to dance. He says, why is that? I says, well, because the good looking woman is controlling. She's a bitch and she's bad in bed. And I have, one more time, I have story after story after story to prove to you that I'm right. See, in the big book, it calls logic. It says in the big book, logic. It's great stuff. We like it. We still like it. So there's stuff that I do logically today after 44 years of sobriety that would make Charlie's head just spin. And I go like, wow. And you're able to stay sober doing that, and vice versa. There's stuff that Charlie does every single day that makes total sense to him. It's his logic system. And I'd look at him and go, wow, and you're comfortable doing that. So see, this is part of our disease, is a disease of perception. And I came into Alcoholics Anonymous with so many old ideas. And when I did the steps in one day with Clint, I had 19 old ideas that I was able to get rid of doing the step work. I gotta look at my timer. So to back up that idea of that chunky women is where I truly, truly get love, I backed that up with, because Clint, when I did the steps in one day with Clint, Clint looked at me, he says, when you think of love, who and what do you think of? And I didn't even have to think of it. I went, my grandma. My grandma is love. There's nobody on this planet that loved me unconditionally and it felt like that, except for my grandmother. He says, really? He says, describe your grandmother to me. And you know what I described? I described all the women I was dating at that time. So I had another old idea that only a grandma type of lady could I get love from. And we just went on this path. It was incredible. You know, when we talked about the A girl and the B girl, he says, so you're never going to have an A girl. I said, well, I'd like to have an A girl, you know, but they're really bad in bed. They're bitches and they're controlling. He says, so if you see a guy with an A girl, what do you think of him? Oh, here goes a couple more old ideas. You know, because when I see a guy with a beautiful woman, that's just a status symbol for him. He's probably got a thick wallet and a small you-know-what. He says, oh my God. He says, you got to get rid of some of these old ideas. Usually I ask people if they want to get rid of them. But my friend, you need to get rid of some of these old ideas because you're making your life absolutely miserable. And what does this have to do with drinking? This has to do with drinking for me is when I don't feel good about myself, I look for other choices. You know, and after 44 years of sobriety, when I did the steps in one day with Clint, I was 12 and a half years sober. So this is a long time ago. This is 32 years ago I did the steps with Clint. And I still do it this way. I still do it with the guys that I sponsor that have been through the steps slowly once first. You know, and in this room, I did it with Charlie. Charlie came to my house with his inventory written, and we went through all 12 steps in one day. And I think it took us about 9 hours. I didn't calculate, but I think it was 9 or 10. But we went through every single step, step by step by step. You know, and I'm not going to share his inventory, but you know, he had he had a pretty solid old idea that he held on to. Held on to it with a death grip. Because just like me, just like Charlie, we have story after story after story to say, see, This is right. This is solid. This is logic. You know, I remember sitting around drinking and doing drugs around my grandparents' house, because that's who raised me, was my grandparents. My dad is an alcoholic. I have 44 years of sobriety. My sister has 44 years of sobriety. She'll have 45 in a few months. Our mom has 46 years of sobriety, and our dad has 47 years of sobriety. So there's a lot of sobriety in my household. We all got sober back in the 70s. But I remember sitting around doing drugs and alcohol around my grandparents' house, and all the giants in my life would sit on the porch. The giants were my grandfather. He was the patriarch of our whole family. There was my dad, who I thought was bigger than God. And there's my two uncles. So there's 4 of these giants, and they'd sit on the porch in this little circle. And they would talk about how Ford and Chevrolet are the best. And back in the early 60s, what was trying to come into the United States of America were these 2 other automobile makers called Toyota and Datsun. And my grandfather didn't even pronounce them right. You know, he called them Toyota. It's Toyota. But they sit around and talk about how Chevy and Ford are the best. Chevy and Ford are the best. And then my grandfather worked for Santa Fe Railroad. And he believed in buying American-made products only. And I heard this over and over and over and over in my head. And as a little 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kid, what I got was that American-made products are a must. So what do I do with this information? To get drugs and alcohol as a adolescent, I used to do a lot of stealing. Thus I got 3 breaking and enterings on my record. But part of my stealing was I used to go steal bicycles. You know, I had to make amends for that later on in life. I'll tell you about that a different time. But I remember stealing a bicycle, and I had to change out some of the parts so that way it didn't look like the exact bike that I stole from my next door neighbor. You know, he's going to see that bike in my driveway. But anyways, I had to change out a couple parts, and I was wrenching down on a nut on this bicycle, and my hand slipped, and I gashed open my knuckle, and blood just squirted with my heartbeat. You know, and I got so mad because I cracked open my knuckle, and I looked at that wrench, and sure enough, that wrench was made in China. See? American-made products are a must. If you buy something from a foreign land, you're going to get hurt. And so what happens with that information? It happened to me again and again and again and again. Every time I used a foreign-made product, I would get hurt. See, folks, I'm just racking up these stories of these old ideas that are going to keep Marty down. You know, I had the privilege quite a few years ago about talking about old ideas at a AA conference in Copenhagen, Denmark. And I went over there, and if you ever get asked to speak at Copenhagen, Denmark, get ready. I think Charlie is the one that got me involved over there because he turned my name into them. So Charlie made it my 4th step, by the way. But they ask you to speak, but then they ask you to speak again. And then they ask you to do a workshop. I wasn't ready for all this. I was going to tell my story once, I thought. No, I told my story once on Friday night. They gave me a 3-hour workshop on Saturday when I showed up, 2, by the way. It's like, oh, by the way, you got 10, 11, and 12 o'clock tomorrow. I went, what? So I just chose to do the old idea, which is the same topic that I chose for this group. And so what I did is I spent my first hour on step 6. We're tired already, have God remove all these defects of character. And what I learned in sobriety, and I learned this through a breakup, that only I can call whatever is my character a defect. I no longer give other people the privilege to call what I do a defect. and vice versa. What you do, I'm not God. So if you're doing something bad or immoral or poor behavior, according to me, that's just what it is. You know, and where that came out was is I went through a breakup, and folks, it tore me apart. I was 10 and a half years sober. This lady, oh man, I loved her. I mean, we're talking real love. This was the A girl. I was going to finally get the A girl. And I loved her. And I almost drank over her. And I remember I was of no use to anybody. I had a job working as a salesman for insurance, and my boss, who was an old timer in AA, even fired me. The same day that girl broke up with me, he fired me. That next day, a car dealership that I just bought a new car from wanted their car back because they couldn't finance me. And that same day, my roommate says, I'm getting married. I need you to move out. My whole little world was crashing on me. And so I was worth nothing to no one. And I still needed to make rent. I still needed to get food. I needed to make money. So my best friend in AA was a construction worker. He says, I got to paint this wrought iron fence around this whole apartment building. And this is a little 1/4-inch strip, 4 sides. And I had to paint each side of that whole fence around this whole apartment building. 220 feet of just sitting here doing this, painting each side of it. And I'm crying the whole time because of the breakup. And my buddy Benji looks at me, he says, dude, I can't pay you to sit here and cry the whole day. You need to get this fence done somehow. And I was like, she left me. She left me, man. I love her. And it just hit me. I was sitting there blaming her for everything in my head. The night before she broke up with me, she gave me this little I love you card. She looks forward to many, many more years together. And I went, she's a liar. See, so I'm starting to take her inventory. I'm starting to call some of her behavior a defect. I had a list of her defects within minutes, folks. And I went, oh my God, I am playing the role of God. I'm saying what she's doing is a defect. I am not God. I don't have that power. What she does probably makes total sense to her, and it's her logic system. Just because it clashes with me doesn't make her wrong. There's somebody out there in this world that's perfect for her. And I was able to let all of that go. It was a life-changing experience to me. So what I've done with all this information is I've built this lifestyle that I have today that's incredible. I got a list right here next to my desk of 10 people I call every week. And Henry's one of them. I call it my powerhouse list. These are 10 people that I respect, like, and love. They're all in AA. And because I'm on the West Coast and I wake up early, I start calling people on the East Coast. And I work my way back across the United States, chatting with these people. And Henry and I have some great conversations, folks. Sachin, you might end up on my list. I might nix one of my people because you're a fascinating guy. I'd love to talk to you regularly. So watch out. I have a life today that I did not know was possible because I let go of old ideas. Because I told you the defects of character, step 6. Humbly ask and remove our shortcomings, step 7. Some people say shortcomings and defective character are the same thing. They just had to separate the two so they can come up with 12 steps. I don't believe that. If the defective character and the shortcoming were the same thing, they would be called the same thing. So I had to do some exploring to figure that out. And what I learned over the years is that my defect of character probably is pretty much the same thing as everybody else. We all have the same deadly sins. You know, greed, sloth, envy, anger, all that stuff. It's just some of it comes out more in me than it does in you, and vice versa. It comes out in you more than it does in me. But what I don't feel like gets looked at and handled, and in my humble opinion, folks, this is why we lose a couple old timers. They never address the shortcoming. They address the defective character. They quit stealing. They quit cheating on their wives. I don't doubt that the least bit. But all the guilt, shame, and blame, the shortcoming of becoming the best Marty I can become, all the guilt, shame, and blame because I used to cheat and steal. If I don't address that too, it stays right there like a pile of crap. And later on in life, I'm 20 years, 30 years sober, 40 years sober, whatever the deal might be. And we call it an Alcoholics Anonymous that we broke our fingernail. That's what made us go out and drink. We can handle devastation, but when we break a fingernail, we go out and drink. My observation and opinion about that for me, folks, is that if I don't address that guilt, shame, and blame for all my bad behavior in the past, I stay sober for a period amount of time, and then I feel that guilt, shame, and blame. It just goes back onto that pile. See, so it's not a broken fingernail. It's all of the guilt, shame, and blame I feel because of poor behavior, bad choices, misunderstandings, whatever you might want to call it. So my deal is I got to address the defective character. I got to quit the stealing. I got to quit the lying. I got to quit the cheating. But I also got to address all the guilt, shame, and blame. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but it changed my life. Chuck C. wrote that book called The New Pair of Glasses. And if you knew Chuck called it A New Pair of Glasses because he was having a meal with Bill Wilson and Father Ed Dowling. And they walked outside of the restaurant, and Father Ed Dowling and Chuck let Bill Wilson pay for the meal. So they're standing outside of the restaurant, and Father Ed Dowling's cleaning his glasses outside. And he put on his glasses, and he looked out and just enjoyed it. And he looked at Chuck, and he says, I feel like life, the sober life, is like having a new pair of glasses. That's where that title came from. So what the step work has done for me, and more specifically, getting rid of my old ideas has done for me, is giving me a new pair of glasses. I get to see things differently. You know what I found out? You know what I found out, Calvin? I'm not stupid. You know, a few people actually think I'm smart. I mean, Charlie thinks I'm a smart ass, but I'm at least smart's in the description. You know, I have an A girl. I married her. I got an A girl. You know, Charlie and Henry said that I married up. Yes, I did. I married up big times. You know, I have love everywhere in it. My love is not attached to a description. My love is not attached to a figure. I got love. I feel love. I give love. When I stay in the here and now, as I started off talking, I have a hard time of staying with the here and now. Right now it's 6:15 a.m., December 10th, 2021, and everything's just good. An old timer in my group, she's still alive today, 53 years sober. She often says, I just aspire to be normal. And when she used to say that, I thought, you simple winch. I bet you do. I bet you settle for mediocrity. But now I get it. When I stay right here, right now, everything's okay. So I'll end with this, folks, and thanks for asking me to come out and share. But I'll end with this. There's a